March 23, 1945. A single piece of paper lands on General Dwight D. Eisenhower's desk. The number on it is so absurd that he reads it 3 times. 50,000. 50,000 German soldiers captured in one night. Not in a week, not in a month. 18 hours. The man responsible wasn't following orders. He wasn't coordinating with headquarters. He wasn't even supposed to cross the Rhine yet. His name was George S. Patton, and what he did in those 18 hours would rewrite every rule of modern warfare. By the time this story ends, you'll understand why the Germans said fighting Patton was like fighting smoke. Everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. But first, you need to understand why everyone thought his plan was completely insane. Spring 1945. Europe is bleeding. The Allied forces have been grinding toward Germany for nearly a year since D-Day. Progress is measured in miles per month, sometimes miles per week. The German Wehrmacht, though battered, is far from broken. They have retreated behind the greatest natural barrier in Western Europe, the Rhine River. 400 miles of fast-moving water. Bridges destroyed, banks fortified, machine gun nests covering every possible crossing point. Allied commanders look at the Rhine and see months of preparation ahead. They see massive artillery bombardments. They see airborne divisions. They see carefully planned operations with overwhelming force. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, Britain's most celebrated general, is preparing Operation Plunder. 80,000 troops, 3,500 artillery pieces, 2 airborne divisions. Weeks of preparation. This is how you cross the Rhine. By the book. Methodically, with overwhelming force. The cost projections are sobering. Thousands of casualties expected. Acceptable losses for such a critical objective. Winston Churchill himself will watch from an observation post. This is supposed to be the moment. The triumphant Allied crossing that breaks the back of Nazi Germany. Supreme Headquarters has allocated every available resource. Fuel, ammunition, bridging equipment, medical supplies. Everything flows north to Montgomery's sector. Everything is planned down to the minute. And then there's George Patton, 3rd Army Commander. The man everyone respects and no one can control. He's been given a secondary role. Secure the Palatinate. Clear out the German pocket between the Rhine, the Moselle, and the Siegfried Line. Support the main effort. Don't cause problems. Patton looks at his orders. He looks at his maps. He looks at the German positions. And he sees something no one else sees. He sees that speed itself can be a weapon. But Moingui around him think he's lost his mind. George Smith Patton Jr. was not born for peacetime. He believed in reincarnation. He was convinced he had fought as a Roman legionnaire, a knight at Crécy, a Napoleonic marshal. War was not his profession. It was his purpose. He walked with an ivory-handled revolver on his hip. He wore polished cavalry boots. He cursed constantly and eloquently. He slapped soldiers in hospitals for what he called cowardice. He was arrogant, abrasive, and absolutely brilliant. His nickname among his own men was Old Blood and Guts. The joke was that it was their blood and his guts. But they followed him anyway, because Patton won. He won in North Africa when everyone said the Africa course couldn't be beaten. He won in Sicily when everyone said the terrain was impossible. He won in France when everyone said the breakout couldn't happen that fast. His secret was simple to state and almost impossible to execute. Never stop moving. Never give the enemy time to think. Attack where they're weak. Bypass where they're strong. And above all else, move. Speed is armor, he told his commanders. Speed is firepower. Speed wins wars. In March 1945, Patton commands 3 corps, roughly 200,000 men, thousands of tanks, hundreds of artillery pieces, a massive force restrained by orders to play a supporting role. He chafes at the restrictions. He argues with headquarters. He complains to anyone who will listen that they're letting the Germans regroup while Montgomery prepares his set-piece battle. And then on March 13th, he stops complaining. He stops arguing. He becomes very, very quiet. His staff officers know this sign. Patton quiet means Patton planning. And Patton planning means something is about to happen that will make the Supreme Commander extremely uncomfortable. On the night of March 22nd, everyone discovers what Patton has been planning. Here was Patton's insane idea. Forget the massive preparations, forget the overwhelming force, forget coordinating with 20 different headquarters. Take 16 assault boats, load them with infantry, cross the Rhine at night. No preliminary bombardment, no artillery preparation, nothing to warn the Germans that anything is happening. Just boats and men and darkness. When his staff first heard this plan, they thought he was joking. The Rhine is not a stream. It's a major river, fast current. German positions on the far bank, machine guns, artillery, mines. The whole operation violates every principle of amphibious assault. You don't cross a defended river at night with minimal forces. You don't attack without softening up the enemy first. You don't launch a major operation without coordinating with neighboring armies. You certainly don't do all of this without telling your superiors. Patton's own logistics officer warns him, "Sir, we don't have authorization for this. We don't have the fuel allocation. We don't have the bridging equipment queued up. If this fails, you'll be court-martialed." Patton's response becomes legendary among his staff. "Then we better not fail." The crossing point he chooses is Oppenheim south of Mainz. Intelligence suggests light German defenses. The main enemy strength is further north, where everyone expects the Allied crossing to happen. Where Montgomery is preparing his massive operation, Patton is going to steal a march on everyone. And not just cross the Rhine. He's going to do it before Montgomery, before anyone. He's going to show the world what speed and audacity can accomplish. His planning is meticulous despite the apparent recklessness. Every boat assigned specific objectives. Every unit knowing exactly where to go. Every contingency considered. The recklessness is calculated. The audacity is deliberate. On the evening of March 22, 1945, Patton watches his men prepare. 16 assault boats, a handful of infantry platoons. The fate of an army riding on whether they can get across before the Germans realize what's happening. At 22:30 hours, the first boats push off into the darkness. The Rhine current catches them immediately. Men paddle furiously. The far bank is invisible in the dark. German positions are silent. Too silent. Every soldier in those boats is waiting for the machine guns to open up, waiting for the artillery to start falling, waiting for the flares that will light them up like targets in a shooting gallery. Nothing happens. The first wave hits the east bank, scrambles up the slopes, establishes positions. Still nothing. The second wave crosses. The third. By midnight, American soldiers are 6 miles deep into Germany. By dawn, engineers are constructing pontoon bridges. By breakfast, tanks are rolling across. German commanders wake up to discover that the Americans are already behind their defensive positions. Positions they spent months preparing. Positions that were supposed to hold for weeks. Gone. Bypassed. Irrelevant. The total American casualties for this crossing of the last Great Barrier to Berlin, 0. Not one man killed. Not one man wounded. Patton calls Eisenhower the next morning. The conversation becomes part of military legend. "I crossed the Rhine last night. Didn't lose a man." The silence on the other end of the line lasts a very long time. But this was only the beginning, because Patton wasn't content with just crossing the river. He wanted to destroy an entire German army. The moment those first tanks rolled across the pontoon bridges, Patton unleashed everything he had. 4th Armored Division led the charge. They didn't stop to consolidate. They didn't wait for reserves. They pushed east at speeds that seemed impossible for armored warfare. 30 miles in one day, then 40. German units couldn't react. Orders from German High Command became obsolete before they reached forward units. "Establish defensive line at Point A," the orders said. By the time units moved to Point A, American tanks were at Point B 20 miles further east. The German command structure began to collapse. Not from casualties. From confusion. From the sheer impossibility of responding to an enemy who moved faster than information could travel. And then the surrenders started. First it was small units, a platoon here, a company there. Soldiers who found themselves surrounded before they knew an attack had begun. Then larger units, battalions, regiments. Entire divisions began laying down their arms, not because they were defeated in battle, because there was nothing left to fight for. Their supply lines were cut, their headquarters were overrun, their retreat routes were blocked. Fighting meant dying for nothing. Surrender meant survival. By midnight, on March 22nd, 3rd, Army prisoner cages were filling up. By dawn on March 23rd, they were overflowing. By noon, the military police battalions responsible for processing prisoners sent an urgent message to headquarters. We have a problem. The number on that message was the number that would land on Eisenhower's desk. 50,127. Prisoners captured in 18 hours. The equivalent of 3 full divisions, gone, removed from the German order of battle in a single night. But the truly insane part was what came next. Third Army had run out of barbed wire. They had literally captured so many Germans that they couldn't build fences fast enough to contain them. German officers began organizing their own men because there weren't enough American guards. Prisoners cooked their own food from captured supplies. They posted their own sentries to prevent escapes. The defeated were managing their own defeat because the victors were too busy advancing to deal with them. At Third Army headquarters, Patton received the prisoner count and smiled. Gentlemen, he told his staff, the Germans kept surrendering. Couldn't very well tell them to come back tomorrow when the paperwork cleared. Then he turned to his operations map and pointed to Frankfurt. I want that city by tomorrow afternoon. 4th Armored Division leads. No stopping. In Part 2, we'll see what happened when Eisenhower flew to Frankfurt to confront Patton personally. We'll witness Montgomery's reaction when he learned that Patton crossed the Rhine before his massive operation even launched. We'll discover why German General Hermann Balck said fighting Patton was like fighting smoke. And we'll learn the exact words Eisenhower spoke that would define Patton's legacy forever. The words that no commander had ever earned before. The recognition that George Patton had figured out something about modern warfare that would take military theorists decades to fully understand. But first, Patton had a city to capture, and 300,000 more Germans to trap. The greatest encirclement of the Western Front was about to begin. 50,000 prisoners in 18 hours. 0 casualties at the Rhine crossing. Frankfurt within reach. George Patton had just accomplished what Supreme Headquarters said would take 6 weeks. He did it in 3 days, without permission, without coordination, without telling anyone until it was already done. Now Eisenhower had a problem. His most brilliant general had just made his most careful general look slow. And Winston Churchill was watching. But the real nightmare wasn't the prisoner count. It wasn't the unauthorized crossing. It wasn't even the diplomatic crisis brewing between American and British commands. The real nightmare was that Patton had stopped answering his phone, and when George Patton goes silent, it means something catastrophic is about to happen. March 24th, 1945. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. Reims, France. General Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's Chief of Staff, walks into the morning briefing with a face that suggests someone has died. Or is about to. Sir, we have a situation. Eisenhower looks up from his coffee. Define situation, Bedell. Montgomery is furious. Smith places a message on Eisenhower's desk. The paper is stamped urgent in red ink. Operation Plunder launches tonight. 80,000 troops. The largest river crossing operation in military history. Churchill is already at the observation post. The world press is gathered. This is supposed to be the moment. The triumphant Allied crossing of the Rhine. Eisenhower scans the message. Field Marshal Montgomery requests clarification on Third Army operations. Requests confirmation that American forces will not interfere with Operation Plunder timeline. Requests immediate establishment of clear command boundaries. Translation. Eisenhower says quietly, "Tell Patton to stop making me look like I'm moving in slow motion." Smith doesn't smile. "It gets worse, sir. Third Army's position reports are coming in every 2 hours. We still can't keep up with their advance. As of 0600 this morning, Patton's forward elements are approaching Frankfurt. He's 45 miles beyond the Rhine, in 36 hours. Eisenhower sets down his coffee. That's impossible. Apparently not when you're George Patton, sir. The Supreme Commander stands, walks to the massive situation map that covers an entire wall of his office. Blue arrows marking Allied positions, red lines showing German defenses. And there, in Third Army's sector, a blue arrow that has moved so far east, it's almost off the prepared map section. Get me Bradley on the line, Eisenhower says. Then get me a plane. I'm going to see this for myself. But Bradley has his own problems. General Omar Bradley commands 12th Army Group, Patton's immediate superior, his oldest friend in the Army, and the man who has spent the past 3 days trying to figure out what his most aggressive subordinate is actually doing. The reports don't make sense. Third Army is consuming 110% of its fuel allocation. They're exceeding ammunition allotments by 40%. They're requisitioning supplies from First Army depots without authorization. They've captured so many German vehicles that they're using enemy trucks to transport their own equipment. And somehow, despite violating every logistics principle in the book, they're advancing faster than any Allied force since the Normandy breakout. Bradley picks up the phone when Eisenhower calls. Ike. I've given up trying to control George. I just call him every morning to find out where he is. Yesterday, he was supposed to be securing bridgeheads. Today, he's about to cut off Army Group B's entire retreat route. Is he achieving objectives? Eisenhower asks. He's achieving objectives that won't be assigned for another 2 weeks. Then, let him run, Eisenhower says. But make sure someone is documenting everything. If this works, we need to study it. And if it doesn't work, then we'll need evidence for the court-martial. Bradley almost laughs. Almost. But there's nothing funny about what happens next. Because 400 miles north, Field Marshal Montgomery is about to launch the largest river crossing operation in history. And he's just learned that an American general beat him by 24 hours. With 16 boats. And 0 casualties. Montgomery's headquarters. Near Venlo, Netherlands. Evening, March 24th. The preparations for Operation Plunder are complete. 3,500 artillery pieces positioned along the west bank of the Rhine. 2 airborne divisions ready to drop behind German lines. 80,000 troops in assault positions. Engineers with pontoon bridges. Medical units with thousands of stretchers. Everything by the book. Methodical. Overwhelming. Exactly how Bernard Law Montgomery fights wars. His chief of staff hands him the final briefing. All units report ready, sir. Artillery bombardment begins in 4 hours. H hour is set for 200, weather forecast favorable. Montgomery nods. Then, almost as an afterthought, his intelligence officer speaks. Sir, Third Army situation update. Montgomery's expression doesn't change. He's a master of control. But the men who know him see the tightness around his eyes. Go on. Patton's forces are now 60 miles beyond the Rhine. They've captured Frankfurt. Current prisoner count exceeds 70,000. Forward elements are approaching the main river. Montgomery sets down the briefing folder. 70,000 prisoners in 3 days, with 6 divisions. Montgomery has been planning this operation for a month. He has 12 divisions, twice the artillery, complete air superiority, every advantage imaginable. And Patton has already captured more territory than Operation Plunder's final objectives. The Field Marshal's voice is very quiet when he speaks. Ensure that our operation is executed with such overwhelming success that the manner of our crossing is remembered long after the speed of theirs is forgotten. It's a diplomatic masterpiece and a declaration of war, not against the Germans, against the American way of fighting. But Montgomery doesn't understand something that Eisenhower is just beginning to grasp. Patton hasn't just crossed a river faster. He's discovered a new form of warfare, and he's about to prove it in the most devastating way possible. March 25, 1945. Eisenhower's C-47 transport lands at Frankfurt Airfield. The runway is still being cleared of destroyed German aircraft. Smoke rises from buildings in the city. The sound of artillery rumbles in the distance. Third Army's advance has moved beyond Frankfurt already. Patton is waiting on the tarmac. Fresh uniform, polished boots, that ivory-handled revolver on his hip. He's grinning. Eisenhower steps off the plane, looks around at the captured airfield, the defeated German positions, the prisoners being marched to the rear in endless columns. George Eisenhower says, "Do you have any idea how many regulations you've violated this week?" Patton snaps a crisp salute. "No, sir. I've been too busy winning the war." They walk to Patton's command vehicle, a captured German staff car. Inside maps cover every surface. Red arrows showing German positions. Blue arrows showing Third Army's advance. The blue arrows are everywhere. You exceeded your fuel allocation. Eisenhower begins. "You captured more prisoners than our system can process. You crossed the Rhine without authorization. You've advanced so far ahead of First Army that you have exposed flanks for 60 miles. And you haven't filed a proper operations report in 3 days." Patton pulls out a larger map, spreads it across the hood of the car. "Ike, look at this." His finger traces a massive arc across central Germany. "We've cut off the German 7th Army right here. 12th Corps and 20th Corps are closing the gap. In 2 days, maybe less, we'll complete the encirclement. That's 300,000 Germans trapped. Maybe more. They can't retreat. They can't resupply. They're finished." Eisenhower studies the map. The implications are staggering. The Ruhr Pocket, Germany's industrial heartland, the greatest concentration of German military force remaining in the West. Supreme Headquarters projected 6 weeks to reduce it. Patton is about to seal it in less than 2. "But the cost," Eisenhower says. "Your logistics situation. Supply is handling it." Patton replies. He's grinning again. "You want to know how we're doing it? We're using German fuel. German trucks. German ammunition. Yesterday, 20th Corps captured a supply depot near Darmstadt. 50,000 gallons of aviation fuel. 300 trucks. A month's worth of rations." Patton didn't even report it. He just distributed everything to his forward units and kept moving. Eisenhower stares at him. "You're running your army on captured enemy supplies, making the Germans pay for their own defeat. It's either brilliant or insane. Maybe both." Patton's grin widens. "Works though, doesn't it?" Before Eisenhower can respond, a messenger arrives. Urgent communication from Supreme Headquarters. Eisenhower reads it. His expression hardens. "Montgomery's crossed," he says quietly. "Operation Plunder successful. Casualties higher than projected. 4,000 in the first day." Patton says nothing. For once, even he knows when to stay quiet. 4,000 casualties. Montgomery's methodical approach. Overwhelming force. By the book. 4,000 men killed or wounded in a single day. Patton crossed with 16 boats. 0 casualties. The contrast is brutal, undeniable, and about to change everything about how the Allies fight the final weeks of the war. The German perspective on these days is captured in post-war interrogations. General Hermann Balck, commander of Army Group G, the forces facing Patton's advance, tries to explain what happened. "We could not understand the American speed," Balck says through an interpreter. His voice is tired, defeated, not just militarily, intellectually. "Our doctrine called for consolidation after river crossings. Rest. Resupply. Bring up artillery. Prepare for the next phase." Patton simply never stopped. By the time we received orders to establish a defensive line, his tanks were already behind it. We would identify his forward positions in the morning. By afternoon, those positions were 30 miles further east. By evening, we had no idea where his forces actually were. One of the interrogating officers asks the obvious question. "Why didn't you counterattack?" With what Balck's laugh is bitter. Every time we assembled forces for a counterattack, Patton hit somewhere else. We couldn't mass troops because we never knew where the next blow would fall. It was like fighting smoke. Everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Another German officer, Colonel Friedrich von der Heide, describes the psychological impact. Our soldiers stopped believing in defense, von der Heide explains. They would dig positions, establish fields of fire, prepare for the American assault, and then nothing. No attack, no bombardment, just silence. Then they would hear engines behind them, American tanks, already past, already cutting their supply lines, already making their positions meaningless. They weren't being defeated in combat. They were being bypassed into irrelevance. The surrender rate accelerated. First hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Not because German soldiers were cowards, because they recognized the mathematical reality. Fighting meant dying for positions that were already strategically worthless. Resistance was not just futile, it was pointless. The Third Army prisoner count climbed past 90,000, past 100,000. The prisoner processing system collapsed entirely. Military police units worked around the clock building makeshift compounds. They used captured German fortification materials, barbed wire from pillboxes, wooden posts from roadblocks. Even sections of the Siegfried Line, Hitler's vaunted defensive barrier, were dismantled and repurposed as fence posts for prisoner cages. The International Red Cross sent concerned messages. Geneva Convention requirements, adequate shelter, food, medical care. Third Army's response was practical, if not entirely diplomatic. The prisoners were being fed from captured German supply depots. They were being sheltered in captured German facilities. They were being treated by captured German medical personnel. The defeated were literally managing their own defeat. March 29, 1945. Standing in a captured German city, looking at maps showing impossible achievements, Eisenhower finally says the words that would define Patton's legacy. "George, you're the only man I know who can make the impossible routine." Patton stops grinning, for just a moment. He understands what Eisenhower is really saying. This isn't a compliment. It isn't a reprimand. It's a recognition, an acknowledgement that Patton has discovered something about modern warfare that doctrine hasn't caught up to yet. He's found a way to weaponize speed itself, to turn the enemy's decision-making process into a vulnerability, to win not through superior firepower, but through superior tempo. The implications will take military theorists decades to fully understand. "Thank you, sir," Patton says quietly. Then the grin returns. "Now about that fuel allocation." Eisenhower shakes his head. "Get back to work, George, and try to leave some Germans for the rest of us to capture." But Patton has no intention of slowing down. The Ruhr pocket is about to close. 317,000 German soldiers about to be trapped. The greatest encirclement of the Western Front. The final statistics of March 1945 are staggering. Third Army captured 113,000 prisoners, more than the entire British 21st Army Group's 87,000 for the same period. With fewer divisions, they advanced 120 miles beyond the Rhine. They destroyed or captured 1,400 German vehicles. And they did it while suffering fewer casualties than SHAEF projected for operations of 1/10 the scale. But the numbers only tell part of the story. The real story is what Patton proved possible. That speed itself can be a weapon. That momentum can replace firepower. That confusion in the enemy's mind can be more devastating than shells on his positions. In Part 3, we'll witness the closing of the Ruhr pocket, the largest encirclement of German forces in the Western theater. We'll see what happened when 317,000 soldiers realized they were trapped. We'll learn how German Field Marshal Walter Model responded to the impossible situation. And we'll discover why even the Soviet Union, the masters of deep battle doctrine, studied Patton's March offensive as a masterpiece of operational art. The war in Europe has 6 weeks left. George Patton intends to win it in 3. And no one at Supreme Headquarters is going to stop him. 113,000 prisoners. 120 miles beyond the Rhine. 0 casualties at the crossing. George Patton had proven that speed could replace firepower. That momentum could shatter armies. That one general operating outside the rulebook could accomplish in days what conventional doctrine required weeks to achieve. Eisenhower called it making the impossible routine. The Germans called it fighting smoke. But now, the real test was coming. 317,000 German soldiers were about to be trapped in the Ruhr pocket, the largest industrial region in Germany, the greatest concentration of Wehrmacht forces remaining in the West. And Field Marshal Walter Model, one of Hitler's most capable commanders, was about to learn what it felt like to be on the receiving end of Patton's operational art. The encirclement was closing, and there was nothing the Germans could do to stop it. April 1st, 1945. German Army Group B headquarters. Somewhere in the Ruhr Industrial District. Field Marshal Walter Model stares at a situation map that no longer makes sense. Model is not an ordinary general. He's Hitler's firefighter. The man sent to stabilize impossible situations. He saved Army Group Center from complete destruction after Operation Bagration. He held the Western Front together after the Normandy breakout. He commanded the defense at Arnhem that stopped Montgomery's Market Garden. When situations are desperate, Hitler sends Model. But Model has never faced anything like this. The blue arrows on his map show American positions. They're everywhere. 3rd Army from the south, 1st Army from the north, 9th Army from the west. The arrows are closing like a vice. His intelligence officer delivers the morning report. Model doesn't want to hear it but listens anyway. Sir, American forces linked up at Lippstadt yesterday. The pocket is sealed. Model's voice is quiet. How many men do we have inside? 317,000, sir. 18 divisions, plus support units. Luftwaffe personnel, naval detachments, and approximately 100,000 civilian workers in war production facilities. Model does the mathematics. 317,000 soldiers. Trapped. No supply lines. No reinforcement possible. No escape route. The Americans have accomplished in 2 weeks what the Soviets took months to achieve at Stalingrad, and they did it with fewer casualties than a single day of Eastern Front combat. What are our fuel reserves? 4 days at current consumption. Maybe 6 if we reduce vehicle movements to emergency only. Ammunition, 7 days of defensive combat. 2 days if we attempt a breakout. Model walks to the window. Outside, the smokestacks of Ruhr factories still rise against the gray sky. The industrial heart of Germany. The foundries that built the Wehrmacht's tanks. The refineries that fueled the Luftwaffe. The steel mills that armed the Reich. All of it, surrounded, useless, cut off from the Germany it was supposed to supply. He turns back to his staff. The American commander who did this. Patton. Yes, sir. 3rd Army. Model nods slowly. I want everything we have on his methods. Everything. If we're going to die in this pocket, I want to understand how he killed us. The reports that reach Model over the next few days paint a picture of warfare he doesn't recognize. Patton's forces don't fight the way Germans expect. They don't mass for set-piece battles. They don't pause to consolidate gains. They don't wait for artillery preparation. They probe. They find weak points. They pour through gaps before defenders can react. They bypass strong points entirely, leaving them to be reduced by follow-up forces. And above all else, they never stop moving. A German colonel captured during the encirclement describes it during interrogation. We received orders to establish a defensive line at Siegen. By the time we arrived, American tanks were already there. We retreated to Olpe. Americans were already there too. We tried to reach Iserlohn. The road was cut. Every position we were ordered to defend was already lost before we could defend it. Model recognizes what's happening. Patton isn't just defeating German forces, he's defeating the German command structure itself. Every order from Model's headquarters is obsolete before it reaches forward units. Every defensive plan collapses because the enemy moves faster than information can travel. The Wehrmacht's greatest strength, its disciplined adherence to orders, has become its greatest weakness. Because by the time soldiers execute their orders, the tactical situation has completely changed. Model sends a message to Hitler's headquarters in Berlin. Request permission to conduct fighting withdrawal eastward. Preserve forces for defense of the Reich heartland. Current position strategically untenable. The response comes within hours. No retreat. Hold the Ruhr. Every factory, every city, every meter of ground is to be defended to the last man. Fight to the death. The Führer has spoken. Model reads the order, sets it aside, begins planning anyway. Not a retreat. Not exactly. But something. Because 317,000 men are counting on him. And Walter Model has never abandoned his soldiers. But this time, there's nowhere to go. The crisis inside the pocket deepens daily. April 3rd. Fuel reserves drop to critical levels. Tanks are positioned as static defensive emplacements because there's no gasoline to move them. April 5th. Food rationing begins. German soldiers receive 1 meal per day. Civilians in the pocket are already starving. April 7th. American artillery begins systematic bombardment of German positions. Counter-battery fire is impossible. There's not enough ammunition. The medical situation becomes catastrophic. Field hospitals overflow with wounded. Surgical supplies run out. Doctors perform amputations without anesthesia. Penicillin doesn't exist inside the pocket. Infection kills as many soldiers as American shells. Model receives reports from division commanders. The same message repeated in different words. Sir, we cannot hold. The men are exhausted. The ammunition is gone. What are your orders? Model's orders never change. Hold your position. Maintain discipline. Wait for relief. But there is no relief coming. Everyone knows it. Model knows it. His commanders know it. The soldiers huddling in shattered buildings know it. Germany has nothing left to send. April 10th. Model calls his senior commanders together. The meeting takes place in a cellar somewhere in the Ruhr. Above them, American aircraft patrol unopposed. The Luftwaffe hasn't flown a sortie in 3 days. There's no fuel for planes. Model speaks plainly. Gentlemen, we have approximately 4 days of combat capability remaining. After that, continued resistance becomes impossible. The commanders wait. Model continues. I am releasing all soldiers under the age of 18 and over the age of 50 from their military obligations. They are to remove their uniforms and attempt to reach their homes as civilians. Silence. This is unprecedented. German soldiers don't abandon their posts. But Model isn't finished. Additionally, I am dissolving Army Group B effective April 15th. All personnel are released from their oath to the Wehrmacht. You may surrender to American forces or attempt to reach German lines as you see fit. A general speaks up. Sir, this violates the Führer's direct order. Model's response becomes legendary. I refuse to lead German youth to slaughter for a war that is already lost. The Führer may do as he wishes. I will answer to history and to God. The dissolution begins immediately. German soldiers start surrendering by the thousands. Not in organized units, as individuals. Walking toward American lines with their hands raised. No longer soldiers, just men who want to live. The largest mass surrender on the Western Front unfolds over 5 days. April 14, 1945. The village of Meschede. Deep inside what remains of the Ruhr pocket, Colonel Creighton Abrams commands Combat Command B of the 4th Armored Division. Patton's spearhead, the tip of the American sword that has carved through Germany. Abrams receives orders directly from 3rd Army headquarters. Push northeast toward Iserlohn. Link up with 1st Army elements. Complete the collapse of organized German resistance in the southern pocket. The tactical situation is unusual. German forces aren't fighting anymore. They're surrendering, or hiding, or simply walking away. But there are still pockets of SS troops who will fight to the death. Fanatics, true believers, the most dangerous enemies. Abrams studies his map. The route to Iserlohn passes through heavy forest. Perfect ambush country. His Sherman tanks are vulnerable in close terrain. But stopping isn't an option. Patton's standing order is clear. Keep moving. Always keep moving. Combat Command B rolls out at dawn. 32 Sherman tanks, 16 tank destroyers, a battalion of armored infantry, Artillery support on call. The column stretches for nearly 2 miles. They enter the forest at Aero 7:30. For the first hour, nothing happens. Burned-out German vehicles line the road, abandoned positions, equipment left behind by fleeing soldiers. Evidence of an army that has simply stopped fighting. Then the lead tank explodes. Panzerfaust. German anti-tank rocket. Close range. Ambush. The column stops. Infantry dismounts. Machine gun fire erupts from the tree line. Abrams is on the radio immediately. Contact front. Estimate company strength SS infantry. Deploying to engage. The firefight is sharp but brief. American infantry advances under covering fire from the tanks. The SS position is flanked within 20 minutes. Casualties are light. 8 wounded. None killed. The ambushers either die or flee. But the delay costs time. And time is something Patton doesn't tolerate wasting. The column remounts, pushes forward. Another ambush at the next crossroads. Then another. Each one smaller than the last. The SS are fighting a hopeless rearguard action, buying time for nothing, dying for a Reich that no longer exists. By noon, Combat Command B has advanced 12 miles. They've destroyed 4 German anti-tank positions, killed or captured approximately 200 SS soldiers, lost 2 tanks and 14 men wounded, 3 killed. Then they reach Iserlohn. The town is flying white flags. Civilians line the streets, not cheering, just standing, watching, waiting for it to be over. German soldiers are everywhere, thousands of them, sitting on the ground, standing in doorways, lying exhausted on lawns, none of them armed, none of them fighting, waiting to surrender to anyone who will accept their surrender. Abrams reports to 3rd Army headquarters. Iserlohn secured. Estimate 8,000 German prisoners awaiting processing. Request military police support. Patton's response comes back within the hour. Excellent work. Continue advance to Arnsberg. Don't stop. The prisoners will keep. By the end of April 14th, Combat Command B has covered 32 miles. They've accepted the surrender of 11,000 German soldiers. They've lost 4 tanks, 23 wounded, and 7 killed. The casualty ratio is staggering. For every American lost, nearly 1,600 Germans are removed from the war. Not through combat, through collapse, through the complete dissolution of an army that has lost the ability to fight. That evening, a German general surrenders personally to Abrams. The general's name is Fritz Bayerlein. He commanded the Panzer Lehr Division, one of the elite armored units of the Wehrmacht. Now he stands with empty hands asking to surrender his command. "How many men do you have?" Abrams asks. "Approximately 15,000, Bayerlein answers. "Scattered through the forest east of here. They will surrender when ordered." Abrams looks at the man who once commanded one of Germany's most powerful divisions, now reduced to this. A messenger for his own army's defeat. "Order them to surrender," Abrams says. "The war is over for them." Bayerlein nods. "For all of us, I think." The collapse of the Ruhr pocket reshapes the final weeks of the war. 317,000 German soldiers surrender between April 1st and April 18th, more than any other encirclement in Western Front history, more than Stalingrad's 91,000, more than Tunisia's 275,000. The single greatest mass capitulation of Wehrmacht forces ever recorded. The strategic implications are enormous. 18 German divisions disappear from the order of battle. Divisions that were supposed to defend the approaches to Berlin. Divisions that were supposed to delay the Allied advance. Divisions that no longer exist. German defensive plans collapse entirely. There are no reserves to fill the gaps. No reinforcements to plug the holes. The road to the heart of Germany lies open. Patton pushes through it at 30 miles per day. 3rd Army captures Erfurt, then Weimar, then Buchenwald concentration camp. The soldiers who find the camps stop being soldiers for a moment. They become witnesses. They become evidence collectors. They become the men who will tell the world what Germany built in the darkness. By April 25th, 3rd Army has advanced over 300 miles from the Rhine. They're approaching the Czech border. Patton wants Prague. He wants to liberate the Czech capital before the Soviets reach it. He argues with Eisenhower. The political implications are enormous, but that decision belongs to generals and politicians. For the soldiers on the ground, the mathematics are simpler. The war that was supposed to last until autumn is ending in spring. The casualties that were projected in the hundreds of thousands are counting in the tens of thousands instead. Every day the war ends early is a day that thousands of men don't die. Patton's March Offensive. The insane, unauthorized lunatic operation that violated every regulation in the book has shortened the European war by at least 6 weeks, possibly more. Some historians argue 8 weeks, some argue 10. The exact number is impossible to calculate, but the lives saved are real. American, British, Canadian, French, German too. Every soldier who surrendered instead of fighting lived to see his family again. That's the final accounting of what Patton accomplished. Not just military victory, not just strategic brilliance. Lives. Thousands upon thousands of lives that would have ended in combat if the war had ground on through a methodical by-the-book campaign to reduce Germany piece by piece. Patton's way was faster, and faster meant fewer dead. April 17, 1945. Deep in the forests east of Duisburg. Field Marshal Walter Model walks alone through the trees. He has dissolved his army, released his soldiers from their oaths, done everything he can to save the men who trusted him. Now he has one final duty. Model will not surrender. He will not be paraded before cameras like Paulus at Stalingrad. He will not stand trial for crimes he committed following orders. He will not give the Allies the satisfaction of capturing Hitler's firefighter. He stops in a small clearing, takes out his pistol, the same pistol he carried through 5 years of war, through Poland, through France, through Russia, through the defense of Germany itself. He thinks of the 317,000 men he led into the pocket. Most of them are alive, prisoners now, but alive. They will go home eventually, see their families, rebuild their lives. He made that possible by releasing them from their oaths, by allowing them to surrender without shame. A single gunshot echoes through the forest. Field Marshal Walter Model, 54 years old, falls. He will not be found for months. When his body is discovered, American soldiers bury him with military honors. Even enemies can recognize duty when they see it. But the man who created the Ruhr Pocket, the general who trapped Model and his 317,000 soldiers, doesn't attend the burial. George Patton is already 200 miles east, still advancing, still capturing prisoners, still making the impossible routine. The war in Europe has 3 weeks left, and there's still one final chapter to this story. The chapter that asks the question everyone has been avoiding. What happens to a warrior when there are no more wars to fight? What becomes of the man who can make the impossible routine when the impossible is no longer needed? In Part 4, we'll learn the answer, and it's not the ending anyone expected. From 16 assault boats on a dark river to 317,000 prisoners in the largest encirclement of the Western Front. From an unauthorized crossing that should have ended his career to a campaign that shortened the war by weeks. George Patton proved that speed could shatter armies, that momentum could replace firepower, that one general willing to break every rule could accomplish what entire army groups following the book could not. 956,000 prisoners. 12,000 cities liberated. The most devastating American offensive in European history. But every story has an ending. And Patton's ending carries a twist that nobody saw coming. Because the man who made the impossible routine was about to discover something far harder than defeating the German Wehrmacht. He was about to discover what happens to a warrior when the war is over. And the answer would break your heart. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The guns fall silent across the continent. In cities from London to Moscow, people dance in the streets. Soldiers embrace. Champagne flows. The nightmare is over. At 3rd Army headquarters in Regensburg, Germany, George Patton watches his men celebrate. He doesn't join them. He stands alone, looking east toward the Czech border. Prague is 50 miles away. He wanted to liberate it. He begged Eisenhower for permission. The answer was no. Political considerations. The Soviets get Prague. Patton gets nothing but the satisfaction of knowing he could have taken it in 2 days. The war is over. And Patton has no idea what to do next. The weeks that follow are the strangest of his life. He's appointed military governor of Bavaria, administrator, bureaucrat, paper pusher, everything he despises. His job is to rebuild what he spent 4 years destroying, manage civilian affairs, process refugees, denazify German institutions, hunt war criminals. Patton is spectacularly bad at it. He makes speeches comparing Nazis to Republicans and Democrats, political parties he calls them. Just different political parties. The press explodes. Eisenhower is furious. Patton doesn't understand what the fuss is about. He's a soldier. Politics bores him. The men he's supposed to prosecute as war criminals are the same men he respects as fellow warriors. He can't see them as monsters. He sees them as defeated enemies who fought well. In October 1945, Eisenhower relieves Patton of command, strips him of 3rd Army, gives him 15th Army instead. A paper command. Historians compiling records of the war. No troops, no tanks, no battles, just documents and typewriters, and the slow grinding work of turning war into history. Patton accepts the demotion without complaint. What else can he do? The war is over. His purpose is gone. He writes letters to his wife Beatrice. They're sad letters, tired letters. A man searching for meaning and finding nothing. I don't know what to do with myself, he writes. Everything I was good at is no longer needed. Maybe it never will be again. His staff officers notice the change. The swagger is gone. The profanity is muted. The fire that drove 3rd Army across France and Germany and Austria has burned down to embers. Patton without a war to fight is like an engine without fuel. Still impressive to look at, but going nowhere. December 9, 1945. A road outside Mannheim, Germany. Patton is on his way to a pheasant hunting trip. His Cadillac staff car cruises through the German countryside. The war has been over for 7 months. In 2 weeks, Patton is scheduled to return to America. Home. Beatrice. His grandchildren he's never met. A hero's welcome waiting. At approximately 11:45 a.m., a 2.5-ton army truck turns in front of Patton's car. The driver doesn't see the approaching Cadillac, or maybe he does and misjudges the distance. The collision is not severe. The truck driver walks away unhurt. Patton's driver is barely bruised, but Patton is thrown forward. His head strikes the partition between front and back seats. He feels nothing below his neck. Paralyzed. The most mobile commander of the war, the general who never stopped moving, will never move again. They take him to a hospital in Heidelberg. The diagnosis is a broken neck, cervical vertebrae crushed, spinal cord severed. The doctors are honest. He will never walk again, never ride a horse, never command tanks, never do anything but lie in a bed and remember what he used to be. Patton takes the news calmly, almost with relief. This is it then, he tells his wife when she arrives from America. This is how it ends. Beatrice stays by his bedside for 12 days. They talk about their life together. 40 years of marriage. Wars in Mexico, wars in France, wars in Africa and Sicily and Europe. A lifetime of service and sacrifice and glory. On December 21, 1945, George Smith Patton Jr. dies in his sleep. Pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that traveled to his lungs. He was 60 years old. He never returned to America, never saw his grandchildren, never received the hero's welcome that was waiting for him. They buried him in Luxembourg, the American military cemetery at Ham. Among the soldiers of 3rd Army who died in the campaign he led, it was what he wanted. To rest with his men, the warriors who followed him across Europe, together forever. But the legacy of what Patton accomplished didn't die with him in that hospital bed. It was just beginning. Military theorists studied Patton's March 1945 offensive for decades. They're still studying it today. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College dedicated entire courses to analyzing Third Army's operations. What they found changed how America fights wars. Patton's instinctive understanding of operational tempo, the idea that speed itself can be a weapon, became formal military doctrine. The 1949 Field Manual on Armored Operations included sections lifted directly from Third Army's after-action reports. The concept evolved, grew more sophisticated, acquired academic terminology, but the core insight remained Patton's. When you move faster than the enemy can react, you don't just win battles. You break their ability to fight at all. The air-land battle doctrine of the 1980s echoed Patton's methods. Deep strikes behind enemy lines, simultaneous attacks across multiple axes, constant pressure that never lets the enemy consolidate. When American forces swept through Iraq in 1991, they were using principles that Patton proved possible 46 years earlier. The speed of Desert Storm shocked the world. 100 hours of ground combat, complete destruction of the Iraqi army, tens of thousands of prisoners, minimal American casualties. The parallels to March 1945 were impossible to ignore. General Norman Schwarzkopf, who commanded the coalition forces, kept a portrait of Patton in his headquarters. When asked why, he said simply, "He figured it out first." The 2003 invasion of Iraq moved even faster. American forces covered the distance from Kuwait to Baghdad in 3 weeks. Speed, tempo, momentum. Patton's principles applied with 21st century technology. Even the Soviets studied Patton. Their deep battle doctrine, developed in the 1930s, shared similar principles. But Soviet theorists recognized that Patton had achieved something remarkable. He had executed deep operational maneuver without years of institutional doctrine behind him. He had invented it on the fly through instinct and aggression and sheer force of will. Soviet military academies taught Patton's Rhineland campaign alongside their own greatest victories. The enemy was studying him, learning from him, incorporating his methods into their own doctrine. That's the ultimate tribute a military commander can receive, when even your enemies acknowledge your genius. The numbers tell the final story. Third Army under Patton's command, 281 days of combat. 956,000 enemy prisoners captured. Approximately 400,000 enemy casualties inflicted. 1.3 million miles traveled. 12,000 cities and towns liberated. Third Army's own losses, 137,000 casualties total, including 21,000 killed in action. The prisoner-to-casualty ratio is staggering. For every Third Army soldier killed or wounded, 7 enemy soldiers were captured or killed. No other Allied army achieved anything close to that efficiency. Patton's way of war wasn't just faster. It was cheaper in the currency that matters most: human lives. The deeper lesson of Patton's story isn't about tactics or technology. It's about something more fundamental. It's about what happens when someone refuses to accept that the impossible is actually impossible. Every institution resists change. Military institutions resist it more than most. Lives depend on proven methods. Doctrine exists for good reasons. The pressure to conform, to follow the book, to do things the way they've always been done is enormous. Patton rejected all of it, not out of ignorance. He knew doctrine better than most generals. He rejected it because he could see that doctrine wasn't keeping up with reality. The technology had changed. Tanks could move faster than the rules assumed. Communications could coordinate forces across wider areas than doctrine imagined. The enemy's decision-making process could be targeted and disrupted in ways that previous generations never considered. Patton saw all of this, and he acted on it. Even when his superiors told him to slow down. Even when logistics officers screamed that what he was doing was impossible. Even when the book said he was wrong. History is full of similar figures, people who saw what others couldn't, who trusted their judgment when everyone said they were crazy. The Wright brothers were told that heavier-than-air flight was impossible. Billy Mitchell was court-martialed for insisting that aircraft would dominate future warfare. Alan Turing was dismissed and persecuted despite breaking codes that saved millions of lives. The pattern repeats across every field: medicine, science, business, art. Someone sees a truth that institutions refuse to accept. They push forward anyway. They're ridiculed, opposed, sometimes destroyed. And then years or decades later, the world catches up, and everyone pretends they knew all along. Patton fits this pattern perfectly. He was too aggressive, too reckless, too unwilling to follow orders he considered stupid. He was nearly sent home in disgrace after slapping soldiers in hospitals. He was nearly relieved of command for making unauthorized statements to the press. He was constantly in trouble with superiors who wished he would just follow the rules. And yet, 956,000 prisoners, 12,000 cities liberated, a war shortened by weeks, tens of thousands of lives saved because the fighting ended sooner than it would have otherwise. That's the trade-off. Visionaries are difficult. They break rules. They create problems for institutions. They're exhausting to manage. But sometimes, just sometimes, they see something true that nobody else can see. And when they're right, they change the world. There's one final detail that most people don't know. After the war, military historians conducted extensive interviews with German commanders. They wanted to understand how the Wehrmacht experienced the Allied campaigns. What worked? What didn't? Which commanders the Germans feared most? The answer was unanimous: Patton. Every single German general interviewed gave the same response. "We could predict Montgomery," one German officer explained. "We knew how British forces would operate. Methodical, overwhelming, by the book. We could plan for that. We could prepare defenses. We could trade space for time. But Patton, we never knew where he would strike next. We never knew how fast he would move. We couldn't plan, because by the time we received intelligence about his positions, those positions had already changed." Fighting Patton was like fighting chaos itself. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the German High Command, said it most simply during the Nuremberg trials. Patton was the Allied general we feared most, the man the enemy feared most. That might be the greatest tribute any warrior can receive. Not medals, not promotions, not even the victories that fill history books. The acknowledgement from the men who faced him in battle that he was something special, something they couldn't understand or predict or defeat. The Germans had plenty of experience fighting aggressive commanders. They'd faced the Soviets for 4 years. They knew what fast, brutal, relentless warfare looked like. And still they singled out Patton. Still they said he was different. Still they admitted that fighting him was unlike anything else they experienced in the entire war. From an unauthorized river crossing with 16 boats to the largest encirclement of the Western Front. From an idea that violated every principle of conventional warfare to a campaign that shortened World War II by weeks, George S. Patton proved that one person with vision, courage, and the willingness to break every rule can change the course of history. 956,000 prisoners captured, tens of thousands of lives saved. A doctrine of speed and momentum that still shapes how America fights wars 80 years later. He died in a hospital bed in Germany, paralyzed from a car accident 12 days before Christmas 1945. He never saw his grandchildren, never received his hero's welcome, never got to ride horses again, or command tanks, or lead men into battle. But his legacy lives on. In every military academy that teaches his methods. In every doctrine that emphasizes speed over mass. In every commander who understands that sometimes the impossible is only impossible because no one has tried hard enough. Patton understood something that most people never learn. That the rules exist to guide ordinary situations. That extraordinary situations require extraordinary responses. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ignore everything you've been told and trust your own judgment. If you know another story like this, a moment when someone's crazy idea changed history, share it in the comments. This channel exists to tell these stories. The moments that textbooks mention in a sentence, but deserve 90 minutes to explain properly. The decisions that seemed insane until they worked. The people who saw what others couldn't and acted anyway. Subscribe to discover more stories like this. Because history isn't just about what happened, it's about the people who made it happen, and the lessons they left behind for those of us still trying to figure out our own impossible challenges. One final thought. Eisenhower, in his memoir, Crusade in Europe, wrote about Patton in words that still resonate today. George Patton was a magnificent soldier. He was also the most difficult subordinate I ever had. I spent half my time reining him in, and the other half wondering why I bothered. That might be the perfect epitaph for a man who refused to accept limits, who broke every rule and won anyway, who made the impossible routine. Because sometimes the people who change history are the ones who simply refuse to believe that history can't be changed. That was George Patton. Warrior, visionary, the man the Germans feared most, and the proof that one person at the right moment with the right idea can make the impossible routine.